Hey guys, thanks again for joining me on this journey of learning how we can better reflect God in all aspects of life by looking at some things that I wished I had been taught as a kid. In my last video, I started on the topic of relationships by discussing a reflective approach to platonic relationships. And so in this video, I want to look at how we can do that same thing, but in our more romantic relationships. I'll be specifically touching on the idea of dating, but many of these same principles can apply to a marriage relationship. So let's get started. Jesus showed us in his interactions that he approached people unselfishly, generously, pouring into them in many ways and not seeking selfish gain from them. However, he also approached people carefully, realizing whenever he needed to take a step back, to be filled, or to rest away from them. Jesus was understanding of himself and others to be able to recognize when it was time to fill and to be filled. Jesus also honored and respected others that he came across, whether they did that to him or not. You can refer to my previous video to hear more about those concepts as well. But for this in particular, those are very important words that I just mentioned when it comes to approaching our dating culture and dating relationships as a whole. So what I think we need to do is this: approach dating with a selflessness, generosity, and caution, using this dating culture to find a partner, but also, and just as importantly, understanding, honoring, and respecting that the individual you're with may not end up being your future partner. Think of it this way: how can I help that individual grow into who God wants them to be at this moment in time while they're with me? Sort of like what is mentioned in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 1 through 2. I believe this is especially important in the culture of the church, where too often the expectation is placed on a couple that the overall end goal of dating and being in relationships is marriage. Regardless of how old you are, how long you've been dating, or anything else, the message that at least I got from the church is that if you're going to date, you have to be ready to marry at any given time. There's no discussion about simply trying to share experience, share life, and help one another grow. Then, with those expectations, there's also so much shame that's wrapped in that idea that if you don't meet the expectation, you must have done something wrong or disobeyed God, because if it was truly a godly relationship, then it should have worked out. And unfortunately, I think this hyper focus comes from the church trying so hard to push back against the hookup cultures that we see and trying to maintain what I believe to be an unhealthy idea of purity. And without getting too far off track, I do want to elaborate a little bit on that just to help you understand what I mean. Purity is absolutely an attribute that we should strive for. Purity of heart, mind, soul, and body. However, when it comes to the church, we really only ever see a focus on the idea of bodily purity, with a distorted view of our bodies, of purity, and of sexuality. I think a lot of this probably comes from early church history, when the idea was coming about that all things physical, including the body, were just inherently bad because of the fall. And the only good things were spiritual things, things that we couldn't see, things that we couldn't touch, that sort of thing. And so because of that, messages that are taught to men and women, boys and girls alike, are that marriage is really the only purpose in life, and that sex is for procreation and not pleasure. So we have to remain pure in a bodily sense at all costs, or we will be of no value to whoever our potential future spouse is. I mean, who wants something that's been used anyway? And it's unfortunate, again, because that line of thinking places our entire worth, our entire value in another human being's perception or desire of us, not in God. And it places our worth and value in our ability to abstain from certain things instead of the value and the worth that we have being creations of the Most High God. And then when someone does fall short, hardly is there ever talk of the redemption that we can receive through Jesus Christ. But don't get me wrong, boundaries are very important in dating and in all aspects of life. And that is something that I would love to talk about more, but I will save that for another video, hopefully in the future. It's just a sad thing, again, to see this idea consciously and even more so unconsciously affect the lives of many individuals, especially females. And hopefully in another video, again, I can flesh all of that stuff out. But for now, let's get back to looking at more ways that we can approach dating with a healthy view and in healthy ways to better reflect our Creator. So looking back again at how Jesus modeled his approach to people is what I think is the best way to do it, because these same things can apply to dating. Jesus was genuine, respectful, honest, elevating, and loving. He put in effort with every person he encountered and still does today, not for selfish gain, but for the sake of the other person, for their benefit, for their growth, and for their healing. Jesus loved and elevated those he encountered, and so we should too, especially in a dating relationship. Think of how much better we can reflect God in a dating relationship if we approach those relationships with the same effort and intimacy and honesty and intentionality that we approach God with. Or better yet, think of how much better we can reflect God if we approach these relationships the same way that God approaches us. So, before I end, I want to reiterate what I believe to be the biggest takeaway here, if nothing else, for better reflecting God through our dating relationships. How can I, or you, help the individual that you're with grow into who God wants them to be at this moment in time? And my thought and my hope is that if both parties approach it this way, both can be edified, both can be elevated, and both can grow into that person that God wants them to be. So go into your relationships or your future relationships, or even use this as a teaching tool for kids or youth groups to learn how to approach dating with a selflessness, generosity, and caution to find a potential spouse, but also keeping in mind that it's just as important to understand, honor, and respect that the individual you are with may not be your future spouse. Thank you guys. See you next time.